Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for joining. And we're here today as part of this webinar series with PFON, and we're talking about the work that PFON is doing on looking at climate change adaptation in the Pacific. And I'm going to give a bit of an overview before I share with some of the FOs to talk about the details of a new project, which is called Climate Resilient Farming in the Pacific Islands. And so just to understand this work, it's the question might be, well, why are small farmers important to address climate change adaptation? And climate change adaptation, is farmers preparing or adapting to the impacts of climate change, as opposed to mitigation, which is about reducing emissions and trying to reduce the level of climate change. The two can sometimes go together, but in the Pacific, farmers and countries make almost no contribution to global emissions, and so they are passive contributors to climate change, but very much affected by it. And so the Pacific is part of the global efforts to receive climate finance to support adaptation activities. But unfortunately, the Pacific is experiencing the same problem that is a global problem, that climate finance really is not reaching farmers. And so globally, less than 3% of climate finance reaches smallholder farmers, even though they're very important. And in the Pacific, that's actually even less. It's about 0.7% is reaching small farmers. But hopefully, Pacific Farmers Organization is going to be able to start to contribute to a change to that. Why? Small farmers form the majority of the Pacific Islands population, 70 or 80%. They are at the front line of the climate crisis, facing the impacts directly of rising sea levels, changing weather patterns, increasing intensity of cyclones. They're the backbone of local economies. The majority of Pacific farmers depend on either subsistence and or small-scale cropping for their food and their income, particularly women and youth. Farmers are at the center of local knowledge and local solutions. Farmer-led approaches can combine traditional knowledge with climate-smart technologies, which makes it ideal for the kind of environments we have in the Pacific and the very high level of diversity. And I guess we have this belief that resilience starts at the roots. That if you invest in farmers, you are building resilient food systems, you're reducing disaster risk, and you're empowering communities to adapt on their own terms. And as I mentioned, these types of approaches are very underfunded at the moment, but urgently needed. And so this relatively new project, it's just finished year one. It's a 5-year program. 4 years of that project have been committed to by DFAT, the Australian government, who are providing in total 4 million up until 2029, 4 million Australian dollars. And the objective is to strengthen the resilience, food and water security of Pacific farmers by supporting local climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction. There are 7 of the 14 PFO member countries involved. That's Fiji, PNG, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, Tonga, and Vanuatu, via the 7 farmer organizations selected in each of those countries. You'll hear a bit more about that later. The target is to reach 84,000 farmers over those 5 years, indirectly reaching 500,000 people, and hopefully it will be slightly tipped in favor of women farmers in terms of that reach. PFON has 3 core components. You probably heard about these before because it's similar to what they've been doing on their earlier FO for ACP program, but the first component is locally relevant climate action, which is basically doing practical things to help farmers adapt and become more resilient to climate change. The second component is increasing the voice of farmers in climate policy. This is about advocacy and PFO and the member FOs building their capability to engage in national and regional climate finance discussions. And that's really key to seeing climate finance reach a higher percentage of resources going to these small farmers. And the third component is about capacity building, stronger farmer organizations. And there's a particular focus that DFAT is supporting around gender equality within the farmer organizations and the capacity to deliver gender-oriented programming. And so in year one, that ran last year and into early this year, and some of the FOs are still implementing this. We're sort of transitioning right now to year two of the project, and all the FOs did a participatory assessment of climate change and agriculture. And they did that by talking to farmers, using participatory tools, diagrams, mapping, a whole bunch of different techniques that were introduced to them through a regional training that Pacific Farmers ran. And the kind of main threats that have emerged from these assessments are things like droughts, extreme weather, pest and disease problems increasing, soil degradation, water scarcity, and sea level rise. And the sort of some of the high risk areas are coastal areas that might be subject to erosion and saltwater intrusion, and hilly inland zones subject to things like landslides and erosion. There are country specifics around that, and that's kind of the strength of it, that each of the FOs has looked at their own countries and the particular areas of the countries where they work. The vulnerable groups that were common across the 7 FOs were women farmers who often face unequal access to land and other resources, face increased workloads and food security pressure. I'll talk a bit about that on another slide. So the smallholder, and who are mostly rain-fed farmers, that's the main target group, and they're the ones who need to strengthen their resilience and access climate-smart technologies. Youth and people with disabilities were also coming out as vulnerable groups that needed targeting and resourcing. And the FOs decided on what the priority crops and value chains that they would focus on. And this was kind of a mix of what was important to their members, and what there were vulnerabilities, that risks in relation to climate change. And so there's a large range of crops, but on a summary level, there was kind of a focus on the staple crops, which are mostly the root crops, but also maize and rice in Timor-Leste, which are the staples there, and vegetables across the board. And then also on looking at climate resilience for important crops for income, cocoa, coconut, banana, avocado, coffee, pandanus were some of the ones across the FOs. And so during year one, the FOs have actually been implementing sort of rapid adaptation activities at the same time as they've done these assessments. And the assessments kind of aim to confirm or adjust the direction of the adaptation activities based on what came out of the assessments. What were the priority vulnerabilities, the priority groups, and basically the adaptation priorities that have emerged are around water management, looking at small-scale irrigation, water conservation in the field, through things like mulching and organic matter in soils, soil and land management, particularly agroforestry, conservation, tillage, erosion control, organic inputs that look after the soil. Diversity and resilient crops is a really strong focus, looking at increasing diversity to reduce risk, drought and pest tolerant, and in some places also high rainfall tolerant and cyclone tolerant varieties, reviving a lot of traditional crops that naturally have many of those features. Women's empowerment, the main focus that came out of the gender analysis that was part of the climate assessment was around things like access to finance for women, time-saving technologies, leadership to improve their access to resources. Disaster preparedness is a focus, which includes things like mangrove and ecosystem restoration for some of the FOs, and then various types of small-scale infrastructure that's within the limited means of the FOs and this project, things like storage, processing, improving market access. And all of this, the farmer organizations will be central to delivering community and farmer-led adaptation. They have a unique role because they're trusted and locally embedded in communities. And so I mentioned that the FOs also did a gender analysis, and this was kind of building their capacity in some new tools to look at and understand gender. And this was some interesting things came out of that. And the key findings were around, women are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and they lack access often to land, finance, training and technologies, climate information, and often are not participating in important decision-making roles. They particularly suffer from the burden of time poverty from both their care and production responsibilities. So across the Pacific, women are generally heavily involved in agriculture, but they also have huge other responsibilities in terms of looking after families, community obligations, cooking, fuel wood, etc., collecting fuel wood. And then the third area was around the sort of what we called sort of institutional gender blindness in extension services that extension programs generally in the Pacific are not recognizing these gender differences and the disadvantages that women face, and therefore they're not effectively responding to it. And so the FOs also can have that problem. And so they're all looking at plans of how to improve their gender-oriented services. And so some of the things that came out of that were to empower women's leadership, to improve access to those resources that we talked about. That could be things like value chain inclusion or women's savings groups, or different approaches that, we know that we can't change some of the fundamental realities of land ownership and, long-term gender inequality, but we can look at how to empower women within those systems, reducing work burden. All the FOs are in their activities from year 2 onwards are trialing a bunch of new approaches, which are things like fuel efficient cook stoves that reduce the amount of firewood that's needed, firewood that's usually collected by women, and hopefully reduce smoke emission as well, improving their health. Indoor smoke pollution is a major health issue for women in the Pacific. Looking at innovative technologies in agriculture, there's not really clear options for that, but the gender analysis is looking at men's and women's roles in crop cycles and seeing where more effort could be put on areas where women take the lead. A classic pattern is that, often men are responsible for clearing fields and sometimes cultivation, but women usually do the weeding and often the harvesting. But most agriculture development projects tend to focus on that sort of production cultivation input, which is led by men. And so thinking more about, are there more efficient ways to do weeding that could save women's time, or are there things like childcare support, that could help to free up some of the other spaces where women face a heavy workload. Through all of this, the aim is to have engaging men as allies, doing gender awareness and various approaches that BFOs, some have experience in and some are just moving into, of sort of trying to get men supporting women and addressing this in an integrated way. And as I mentioned, kind of building gender capacity of the FOs themselves. So what's happened so far in terms of impacts? Well, in year one, these are some charts from our meeting in Fiji a few weeks ago, where all the FOs were together. And we kind of touched base on where we're up to, and the FOs have tested 39 different adaptation technologies, which is pretty amazing, and really shows the locally led approach, and the real strength of PFON is kind of empowering the farmer organizations to find their own solutions that are relevant to their farmers in their context. And this really showed that's working really well. Almost 14,000 people were reached directly in year one. There were 31 unique delivery methods, which again was really amazing diversity of approaches, which ranged from kind of direct training through to training of trainers at the community level, diversity fairs, a whole range of different approaches to engaging with farmers and spreading information and technologies. And as I mentioned, the 7 assessments, including the gender analysis, were done by each of the FOs. And so in the next phase of the project, where I guess we're really hoping to question ourselves about, okay, well, what does that mean? There's 14,000 people reached. We're aiming to reach 84,000 people by the end of the project, but how will we know whether their resilience is improved or not? The so what question. And on this front, we're trying to roll out an innovative process where each of the FOs is beginning the process of talking to their farmers about what does resilience look like to them, and what would be a situation of low resilience and high resilience, and what would be the indicators of that. And then we're aiming to set up a system where the FOs will be able to speak to the farmers about where they're tracking. And as an example, on this image here, and these are really just examples, but what might a climate resilient farming family look like? And it could be things like having access to the natural resources that they need, having fertile soil, crop varieties, seeds, forest, water, having the financial resources that they need to support them through difficult times or crop failures or climate-induced extreme weather events. So that could be access to credit or cash or savings or assets. That could even be things like livestock, and the individual resources, their health skills, their capacity, their traditional knowledge, a lot of stuff around kind of relationships that is very important for resilience, that farmers have maybe local groups, that they have good leadership, that they have networks, that other support functions within their communities are working, and then that they have the required resources on a wider scale, like access to markets or tools or roads or irrigation equipment. And so what we're asking the FOs to do is to look at those kind of things and come up with a limited, 3 to 6 indicators, farmer-defined indicators of resilience, and they will be tracking those over the next few years, so that we're hoping to be able to show that these adaptation activities directly contribute to changes in household resilience. So that's the end of my talk. We've been introduced to these new AI tools. So here's a QR code where there's a more in-depth audio deep dive into the climate resilient farming project and our kind of progress to date and why we're doing it. if you want to know more, but I think you're about to hear from a couple of the implementing FOs in a bit more detail on what this looks like in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Maybe we will ask you to stop share, and then we'll hear from Papua New Guinea.
Okay.
Over to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Lasalini. And thank you, Tony, for the introduction to the project. My name is Barbara Tomi. I work with PNG Women in Agriculture Development Foundation as the Women Empowerment in Agriculture Officer. So we are PNG is one of the 7 countries in the Pacific that is implementing the climate resilient farming project. Thank you. Next slide. PNG Women in Agriculture Development Foundation is a registered NGO and is made up of 135 registered groups, 8 corporate members. It provides representation in more than 20 provinces in PNG. It is currently headquartered at the National Agriculture Research Institute in Lae, Morbe Province. And in that partnership, NARI provides in-kind support in the form of office space, internet access, transport, and partnership services. PNGWE's vision is PNG families and communities will be prosperous and women recognized as equal partners in agriculture for development. Its mission is to amplify the voice of women in agriculture and to provide a market-based pathway for economic independence and empowerment to women and their families. As I said, PNG WEA is one of the 7 farmer organizations under the Pacific Islands Farmer Organization Network that is implementing the CRF project funded by DFAT. The project aims to strengthen resilience, food and water security of Pacific farmers by helping them to adapt to the threat of climate change and natural disasters. PNGWE's project site where it is implementing the project is in a province, Simbu, that's up in the highlands. PNGWE is working through its affiliated member, Simbu Provincial Women in Agriculture. Simbu is in the highlands of PNG. Its defining feature is Mount Wilhelm, the highest peak in PNG, rising to 4,500 meters. The landscape is dominated by valleys, ridges, and steep slopes with elevation ranging from 112 to 4,451 meters above sea level, an average elevation of 1,573 meters. This rugged topography has profoundly shaped settlement patterns and transportation infrastructure. Accessibility to all the districts is a major challenge. Many areas are reachable only by foot and air. However, the same ruggedness contributes to Simbu's unique biodiversity and stunning natural beauty. Simbu's topography also plays a crucial role in its climate and agriculture production. In 2024 alone, Simbu experienced 3 significant landslide events that resulted in fatalities. In March, there were multiple landslides in Kundiawa, Gembog, and Gumini districts, and a further 12 landslides blocking the Highlands Highway from Gumini to Kundiawa town. Simbu is divided into 6 districts: Chuave, Gumini, Karamui, Nomane, Kerawagi, Kundiawa, Gembog, and Sinasina, Yongomugol. And PNG, due to what I've explained about its accessibility, we could only be able to access 5 districts, which are Chuave, Gumini, Kerawagi, Kundiawa, Gembog, and Sinasina, Yongomugol. We couldn't access Karamui Nomane because it is only accessible by air or walking by foot. Its total population, the whole province of Simbu, is 535,457. So that is the total population of the province. The rapid adaptation activities in the province centered on training of trainers program, which focused on climate change adaptation assessments, gender analysis. So that the TOT involved 34 participants. PNG WIA did the training, predominantly men and women farmers from 5 of those districts mentioned earlier. From the 34, 30 participants were certified as climate resilient farming trainers at the end of their training, and they were tasked to conduct 3 trainings each in their cluster groups or communities, and to target 20 participants per session. These sessions covered vulnerability assessments, awareness on climate change, watershed management, seasonal and hazard calendars, cropping calendars, also adaptation options due to the natural disasters that they face, and gender assessment. And the target of beneficiaries to reach was 2,500 people. Another component of the project was the multiplication and distribution of climate resilient planting materials. With the provincial Women in Agriculture group, they identified 3 lead farmers who became the seed multipliers. So these three lead farmers are from 3 districts. And with our partnership, PNGWS partnership with NARI, we source drought tolerant and early maturing sweet potatoes, quality plantain maize, rice, low cyanide content cassava, and soybean. And these crops were distributed to these 3 farmers to grow and later distribute further to the other TOTs who will distribute to the farmers. So some of the achievements against our target, we conducted 1 TOT training. 34 people were trained on climate resilient farming and adaptation assessments, including doing gender assessment. Over 90 communities in 5 districts, reaching 2,549 people. And from this number, there is 1,033 are youths and 122 are people living with disabilities. All climate resilient planting materials were grown, and in the last 2 months they've been harvested and currently being distributed. Some have completed distribution, but 1 more farmer yet to complete distributing to the TOTs, who will further distribute to their model farmers in the district. So doing a TOT was quite new, and it was quite challenging because PNG WIA is based in another province, and we had to use partners in Simbu to deliver this method. And the good thing, it was a good learning curve, and it was a good method to deliver the messages of impacts of climate change to the farmers that are really on the ground, because we only worked with the model farmers, and they in turn had to go and work with the farmers in their villages, in their communities. So how farmers can work out solutions or adaptation measures to build resilience in their local settings. Additionally, working with Simbu WIA members propped up women's role as an important partner in contributing to family, food and income, and in building a resilient farming community. So going forward in the next 2 years, years 2 to 4, PNG WIA plans to capitalize on the network and partnerships, inroads it has made and forged with the Simbu Provincial Women in Agriculture, the Provincial Department of Agriculture and Livestock, the TOTs and the model farmers that we worked with, and NARI, to implement adaptation activities that addresses hazards in Simbu, which is mainly landslide, soil erosion, and soil and water management, ensure climate resilient planting materials will be continuing to be available in many other communities, and to build the capacity of the Provincial Women in Agriculture to amplify the voice of women food producers in policy, resource allocation, decision making, and build the capacity of families to address harmful gender norms. Thank you. So that is from PNG WIA, what it has done and what it plans to do.
Okay, so.
Thank you. I think we've heard from Papua New Guinea, and now we will move towards the Garden Island of Fiji, where Latai Smith from Teitei Taveuni will present to everybody about the works that they do under the Climate Resilient Project.
Is that thing open? Okay, sorry, I'm late.
No worries, Latai, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. You can hear me, okay, sent. Okay, empowering farmers of Taveuni. For Teitei Taveuni, we started in 2000, established in 2009. Founded in 2009 during a summit by the Ministry of Agriculture and SPC, a response to unsustainable farming in deforestation on Taveuni. Farmers are the first responders to agriculture and environmental change. Starting with 10 to 20 members, we are now working with nearly 1,000 farmers across the Pacific, across the island, sorry. 7 farmer groups, each led by trained community facilitators, grassroots model driving expansion and farmer engagement. Training and capacity building, continuous training and workshops, topics sustainable farming, climate adaptation, gender equality. All this done by the support of donors and partners. Farming is a family commitment, men, women, and children involved. Community facilitators, local farmer-led leader trained as facilitators, enables a wider outreach and stronger peer-to-peer learning. builds trusts and makes knowledge practical using community facilitators, and also proven cost-effective using extension method. All farmers are equally effective when knowledge is shared. The Land Care Project showed peer training boosts confidence. We encourage sustainable land practices and shared responsibility. Addressing poverty and imports, farmers still face poverty due to reliance on imports, foods, seeds, and building material. Solutions through collaboration and local innovation, promoting self-reliance and community resilience. Programs in action with Teitei Taveuni, pandanus planting for weaving, fruit preservation and drying of breadfruit and root crops, producing food flour and livestock feed, poultry farming and beekeeping for food security, knowledge sharing and resilient crops make strong communities. Donor support and partnerships, support from donors, government, and regional partners help Teitei Taveuni with their training, resources, and technical help, which makes growth possible. Partnerships are key to building resilient communities. Our vision, sustainable food, secure future for farming and families. Climate resilient, empowered communities, less poverty and reduced import dependency, and scaling our impact with your continued support. Thank you, Law.
Thank you so much to the three presenters for today's webinar. There was a lot of good information that's come up on the climate resilient activities that's happening at the PFON level and also to down at to our farmer organization level. And today we are fortunate to have Barbara from PNG and Latai. Thank you so much for your time. And we know you have the challenge of internet, but we know that others have gotten good information out of the presentations today, and for Tony joining us from Australia. We will now, we still have some time for question and answers that we will open the floor to the attendees or the participants. Thank you so much for your time to attend this webinar. But if you have a question or anything in terms of climate resilient or queries, question, comments, or whatever work experience you have in your different place of work, please feel free. We've got another 15 minutes with us where we'll open it to everybody. And feel free to just put your hands up or share your comments via the question and answer page, or you can just raise your hand and we will allow you to speak. Thank you. Otherwise, is there anything else from the three panelists?
I just want to add something. I think Tony mentioned it, that we're about small farmers, and this project is really bringing to the fore the voice of small farmers. They don't get to really express what they're facing. Like all these natural disasters are happening, and they think that it's I mean, in PNG, some are saying, "Oh, we must have gone and killed a snake up the river there." So there's rain coming and it's flooding and it's carrying. We are having landslides. We have this traditional belief, and so when we were talking about climate change, how the change in weather and patterns and all that is affecting, causing all this. It was something that they've learned, that's something new that they've learned, that it's not like we say sanguma, traditional beliefs. It's not that. It is something really all throughout the world they're experiencing these changes, and the Pacific as well. So we're helping them to know that this is not something that they have done. It is something that's natural, and they have to prepare for such things by coming up with some solutions. How can they help themselves to ensure that they are away from these disaster zones, or if that happens, they have some barriers there that can protect them. Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara. There's a question in the Q&A for Tony and Barbara from Jane. Do you think there is still space in the Pacific market for more projects of this nature, or how should they be changed or directed?
Good question. I think yes, definitely. I mean, even among, like we mentioned, this project is only able to work with 7 out of the 30 member FOs of PFON. So even within PFON, there's a huge need for resourcing to expand to reach all of the member farmer organizations. And then, even if we look at all of the PFON members, and this was something that we were looking at a few weeks ago in Fiji as part of our kind of impact analysis on the FO for ACP, while this structure is amazingly effective at reaching tens of thousands. Actually, we modeled in a previous PFON project 300,000 people in the end benefited from the work of PFON. But even that is not enough. There's still millions of farmers in the Pacific who are not connected to practical hands-on organizations that can help them to adapt. And if they are, those organizations probably don't have the resources to do what's needed. And so yes, I think there's huge potential for more projects, and there's also potential, I guess, for some of the big existing projects to have more partnerships with organizations like PFON and farmer organizations, so that more resources do actually reach small farmers and help them to take practical steps to improve their resilience. What do you think, Barbara? You've got a big country there with a lot of need. What's your thought on projects?
Yeah, I mean, we can only reach one province because of our capacity, and there's a whole lot of 21 provinces there that they're not they could have benefited from such a project. There's scope for a lot more, and like we are dealing with, as I mentioned earlier, illiterate people with up to grade primary school level, and these are the ones that are farming at the moment. Those that are a bit educated, higher level, they're in the town looking for jobs. So there's a lot more that needs to be done, but we can only like one province at a time for us. Yeah.
Latai, what about in Fiji? Not sure if you can hear. You're on mute in case you're talking.
Sorry about that. With us here in Fiji, I think we find it a bit more easier because there's a lot of interaction between farmers, and we have a lot of sharing, and I guess maybe we would have the same problem is, Barbara, if we were dealing practically with the whole of the Fiji group, whereas with us, we are much easier, and for Taveuni is more beneficial, is because we're only working within the Taveuni as one, and it's quite easier for the interaction between farmers, like I said, because we have our sometimes, you know, I mean, I'm not condemning what Barbara said, but sometimes we take it that literacy is a barrier for people towards farming, and sometimes I think illiterate people make better farmers. It's just that sometimes it's the way we interpret things, and but I find I have an experience with that. There is an illiterate guy that lives with me, but it's just that the way he communicates is through a grog bowl, having grog sessions, and whatever he learns, and I'm always bringing him into this because I was trying to prove actually that one point, Barbara, about that being illiterate, but I was surprised at the amount of information he, as one of just the followers of what we were doing, managed to broadcast that news to a lot more other farmers just by meeting up in a grog bowl and sharing, even though they don't actually speak our language, they get that message across.
Thank you. I think there's 2 questions to be answered, and then we will hear from Dr. Richard Bear and Alan, who put their hands up. So the first question was from Marita. What kind of adaptation options resonated most with the smallholder farmers that were trained through the program?
The question again.
It's to anyone.
Yes. What kind of adaptation options resonated from the smallholder farmers through the program? Maybe we can start off with the 2 implementing partners and then move to Tony, who can give an overall.
In PNG, or in our project site, one of the main adaptation is agroforestry. It will also be quite new there, and they're prepared to learn and apply that, because they also experience in landside also as well, because they are cutting down trees for for building houses, even selling timber. So that was one of the issues that and they're prepared to do agroforestry aside from other like contour farming, drainage and getting barriers into their gardens so they can be able to uphold and save their soil from eroding.
Thank you. Latai?
Yeah, adaptation programs that are going on in Taveuni really right now are mostly planting trees, replanting a lot of trees, especially the coconut trees, because a lot of those coconut trees that we've had have been planted by great-grandparents, and then so mostly planting of trees and identifying resilient crops to distribute to the farmers, which they have forgotten. Well, they probably knew about it, but have not made an effort to plant. So that's what some of the things that we are doing in our adaptation processes.
Those are good examples. It seemed like across the FOs that there was a lot of diversity. That's what I mentioned. There was that 40 or so different adaptation approaches, but a common one that seems to be quite successful, at least in something that can be done quite quickly, is diversification. So introducing new varieties of crops that are more resilient, or increasing the range of varieties of crops, and included among that sort of crops for staple foods, nutrition, and improving soil fertility seem to be some of the key actions. And I guess like adaptation and climate resilience often kind of meshes with existing agriculture problems that small farmers face, which are things like soil fertility and pest and disease management, and all those things are only facing more pressure under climate change. So for many of the FOs, it's actually continuing and expanding the things that they know work for their farmers, but with a bit more of a climate understanding and framework. So say introducing varieties that can survive the expected increasing cyclones or expected increasing rainfall or droughts. That looks really promising.
Thank you. Thank you for the responses. And Mosi has raised the question, do we have a crop profile of the Pacific varieties that are resilient to climate change? This would be a beneficial information or document that can assist and guide farmers towards climate change awareness.
Maybe I can answer that a little bit. I mean, I think the issue there is, I mean, there are resources like that. SPC has resources like that of germplasm collections that are climate resilient. So does NARI in PNG, has quite a huge collection. But the problem is often not so much is that documented or is that available, but how would small farmers access it? And coming down to all these issues that we're talking about, that's where the FOs play a really critical role. I think is more about enabling access. And so PNG WIA did that with NARI, that they were able to get varieties that NARI probably had for quite a while, but get them out to communities that may never have got them. And similarly, a lot of the FOs have worked on kind of mechanisms to test varieties. That's happening in Timor-Leste and in Solomon Islands, among others, where they're sort of growing the recommended varieties, but then letting farmers evaluate whether they think those varieties meet their requirements, whether that's taste, performance, real life conditions that they grow in compared to research stations, that type of thing. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, but definitely there are some emerging crops and varieties that look really promising, and fit in well in the Pacific.
Thank you, Tomi. I think Dr. Richard Bear had his hands up.
I'm not sure if I can be heard. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay. Look, first of all, my sincerest apologies. Pressure of work. I've got 3 largest projects going on at the moment, so I haven't been able to watch all the webinars. So I apologize if I'm going over previous ground. But my comment is that I work extensively with women's groups. I've got 8 around the Pacific. And the most important thing for sustainability is that there has to be a return for effort. It's okay to get groups together and work on grandma's recipe for guava jam or whatever, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But where my expertise and certainly experience lay in transferring that into dollars, because there has to be a return for effort. Otherwise, it becomes a disparate group. And we have some, as you'll know, Teitei Taveuni is still going. I've got a group here very close to my house, which has now been going for 6 years. We've been women's groups that are supplying an international FMF, which is not particularly good. I'm not in favor of them too much, but at least they're supplying with breadfruit and vundi and so on. And so my point really is, and again, I think I'm out of step because this may well have been covered in previous webinars, for which I apologize to everyone. I don't want to repeat anything. but the expertise is there. This is my thing. And I can get cheap packaging in. I know exactly where the cheap packaging is. I can reel off, because I'm a member of Codex, I can reel off the requirements of a label and things like that, which actually gets grandma's guava jam into a jar, into a retail pack, and there's dollars there. And that's my point. Again, I apologize for interjecting in this particular webinar, but it's all women-centered. I have to tell you, every group is women-centered. Thank you very much for your time, and I apologize, and it's great to see some of my old friends. God bless.
Thank you, Dr. Bear. Is there any last comments from the panelists before we close the session for today? Any final remarks? And before that, we would like to thank all the attendees in the room. Thank you for your time to attend this informative session. So final remarks from the panelists, and then we will end the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Yvonne, for this series, enabling us to talk more about what we are doing under CRF in our sites here. So thank you, Tony.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for organizing
Yeah.
it, and get in touch if you want more information.
Thanks, Law. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you,
It was
Latai.
nice sharing with you last weekend.
Yes, it is.
Sorry, I was
Keep up the
late
good
anyway.
work.
Sorry, I was late, Law.
No worries. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending and for your time. We will now close. If there's any more questions or queries about the project, please do not hesitate to contact Pacific Farmer Organizations through info@pacificfarmers.com. Thank you.
Inaka. Bye.
Buddy, thank you all. What do you think?